Welcome to Roosevelt Middle School's annual Black History Month celebration. Tonight's program will feature special appearances by some of the most iconic African American figures in this nation's history. We will also have a slideshow presentation honoring other individuals whose contributions were and are essential in fully appreciating the vast impact their accomplishments have had on this country. In addition, we will feature accompanying audio and video presentations which honor these distinguished heroes and their enduring struggle for equality. For the duration of our program, we ask for you to pause and reflect in memory of those seen and unseen in tonight's commemoration. We hope that today's tribute is as inspiring and emotionally moving to you as it has been for us to present it. Thank you for your support. And now Juliana from the 8th grade with her original poem.
A month dedicated to African Americans, the sacrifices they had made because of the color is truly unfair. They have suffered significantly. For centuries, African American slaves, both men and women, you see, slavery does not care about your gender. It does not care about your sexuality. In some cases, it does not care about your race. In this case, slavery was forced upon African Americans because of their race and in the city. Many people brought justice to this matter. Hundreds and thousands of people died for this cause. I walked up the stage scared, but you know who was scared to give a speech with his life on the line? Martin Luther King. He was a man of his word. He still is. His famous I Have a Dream speech came true, but at a cost of his own life. Rosa Parks, Frederick Douglass, the 54th, Abraham Lincoln, and many others gave their lives for us to live in the Promised Land. And each person here makes it up. We are the Promised Land. This is our dream. We can't forget who fought for this. So this is why we give our time of February to African Americans to celebrate Black History Month, in tribute to those we honor, to those who had fallen for us. Thank you.
In the past 200 years, there have been countless figures whose voices and actions still make an impact on ours. Harriet Tubman was born a slave in 1820 on a Maryland plantation. She despised slavery in the way that she and other slaves were treated. She escaped in 1849 and went north, deciding to help other slaves make their way to freedom. What she did to help others makes her one of the bravest and most noble Americans who have ever lived. Here is more her story.
Thank you. As Chloe has said, I did successfully make my way north to Pennsylvania. To make it safe for others to escape to the north, I founded the Underground Railroad, a network of safe houses where fugitive slaves could hide on their journey north. I was a guide on this railroad and made 19 trips down south and back and personally led 300 people, including my own parents, to freedom. The South put a $40,000 bounty on my head, dead or alive. Over $1 million in today's money. But I still continued. When the Civil War started, I became a spy for the North and operated in Maryland and Virginia. When the Fugitive Slave Laws passed in 1850 that required northern states to return fugitives to the South, I led people all the way to Canada. I would carry medicine to quiet crying babies when the enemy was close at hand. Once started, some of my fellow passengers began to give in to fear and requested to go back to the South. This would jeopardize everyone's safety in quest for freedom. So I felt the appropriate response was to raise my double barrel and reply, "You go on or die." In addition, I also led an armed expedition that liberated 700 slaves in South Carolina. With the exception of John Brown, Frederick Douglass said of me, "I know of no one who has willingly encountered more perils and hardships to serve our enslaved people than Harriet Tubman." Later in my life, I legally fought the government for more than 30 years to receive a small pension to live on.
Born in New England, 1811, Harriet Beecher Stowe got to see the evils of slavery firsthand. When she moved near the Ohio and Kentucky border, she was already a successful author and had written many other works. However, something happened in 1850 that changed not only her life, but the lives of millions of others. I'll let her tell you that story.
Thank you, Clay. It is true that I always hated slavery, but the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850 was so cruel and terrible, it prompted me to write a novel which would show all who read it how unfair and unjust slavery was. The act stated that a slave who had successfully escaped and made it to a free state could be recaptured and returned to his or her owners. The name of my book was Uncle Tom's Cabin, or Life Among the Lowly. I tried to show people how despicable and evil slavery itself was and what a sad and miserable life the typical slave endured. My book became an international bestseller and sold 300,000 copies. It educated Northerners as to how horrible slavery was and forced the people of America to see how shameful it was to allow slavery in this nation. It also infuriated most Southerners who believed slavery had a place in America's future. This helped lead to the Civil War, which eventually brought an end to slavery and preserved the Union. Around 1863, when I met President Abraham Lincoln, he said, "So you're the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war." My written works filled 16 volumes, but I am mostly known for my first novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin.
John Brown was born in Torrington, Connecticut in 1800. While there have been many talkers throughout American history, John Brown can only be labeled as a doer. Perhaps the most controversial member of the Abolitionist Party, John Brown would stop at nothing to see his one vision for this country to be fully realized, that the complete and total annihilation of slavery and all its evil sins.
The manner in which he chose to fulfill his mission has divided the world's opinion on it as strongly as the cost that spawned it. Whether you decide to label him a madman or martyr will leave entirely up to you. Please welcome Mr. John Brown.
Thank you. As Clay has already stated, I had known that the ultimate sin in this great country of ours has been the evil of slavery and all of its wretched and vile abominations. I was raised as a young boy with the belief given to me by my father, who would always consider himself a pious and God-fearing man above all else. My formative years were also defined by a single, unforgettable image. When I was 12 years old, I personally witnessed the brutal beating of a slave boy, a despicable event that would forever haunt me. When I turned 20 years of age, my father and I became conductors on the righteous Underground Railroad, which you've already heard of by Miss Harriet Tubman. As the twig is bent, so the tree will grow, my father would be fond of saying. 2 years later, the abolitionist publisher Elijah Lovejoy was shot to death in Illinois by a pro-slavery mob. As a memorial service in Hudson, I rose from my seat and, raising my right hand, issued the following vow. Here before God, in the presence of these witnesses, I consecrate my life to the destruction of slavery. By the summer of 1859, I had decided to launch my crusade against slavery in the South by attacking the federal arsenal in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. I had hoped to seize the arsenal's huge cache of guns and incite slaves to arm and rebel. On the night of October 16, 1859, myself and 21 men, fugitive slaves, college students, free blacks, and 3 of my own sons quietly entered Harper's Ferry. Then that as well, all hell broke loose. Soon, 8 of my freedom fighters were dead or dying, 5 others were cut off, 2 more had escaped from the cross of the river, and I was severely wounded. I gathered those who were still alive in a small brick building to wait out the night. Surrounded by federal troops, I refused to surrender and was taken prisoner. Just days after the raid, my week-long trial began, and on November 2nd, the jury deliberated for 45 minutes and reached their verdict: guilty of murder, treason, and inciting slave insurrection. As I was led to the wagon containing the very coffin I was later to be buried in, I performed my final act of defiance. I spotted a young black woman with an infant in her arms. I quickly pulled away from my captors and placed a loving kiss on top of the child's forehead. I then sat on top of my coffin as the wagon proceeded to bring me to the gallows, where I was executed by hanging. My last words were written on a piece of paper I had handed to the foreman. I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land can never be purged away but with blood. My premonition became reality, for only 16 months later, the first shots of the Civil War were fired, which would eventually fulfill my mission. Hanging was not the end of me, it was just the beginning. In Massachusetts, Henry David Thoreau proclaimed, some 1800 years ago, Christ was crucified. This morning, Captain Brown was hung. He is not Old Brown any longer. He is an angel of our light. Our next speaker, Frederick Douglass himself, said, I could live for the slave, John Brown could die for him. Holy hell.
Frederick Douglass was born in Talbot County, Maryland, 1818. Born into slavery and denied education, he learned to read with the other help of individuals, and through sheer determination and willpower became literate. He would rise to the preeminent African-American intellectual of his time. Please welcome Mr. Frederick Douglass.
New Bedford and America were far different places than they are today. In 1838, 4 million Africans were slaves, the property of someone else who had bought them. These humans had no rights, no freedom, no hope, except a small, dangerous chance of escaping from their owners in the South and traveling north for freedom. That is the very chance I took that brought me to New Bedford 171 years ago. I was then around 200 years old. I say around because my exact birthday was not considered important enough to document, since I was born to a slave named Harriet, and therefore I was a slave as well. At an early age, I knew that getting an education and being able to read must have been very powerful weapons, because it was considered a serious crime to teach a slave to be literate. I therefore, with the help of others, was determined to learn to read at any age, at any cost. I grew stronger and smarter, made my escape, and headed north. I eventually reached New Bedford, Massachusetts, one of the many stops along the Underground Railroad. Over the years, I fought against slavery and became an abolitionist. I gave many speeches, began weekly newspaper, wrote a narrative detailing my life as a slave, and even advised President Lincoln about allowing black soldiers to enlist in the Union Army. The 180,000 Africans who fought for freedom helped defeat the Confederate Army in the Great Civil War. I was proud to tell you that my own son Louis fought bravely for the Massachusetts 54th Regiment, whom you will meet shortly. The Union victory eventually led to the legal freeing of the slaves, which the Emancipation Proclamation had so readily begun. I wish I could tell you that this was the end of slavery and denied the civil rights and accomplishment but unfortunately I cannot ignore ignorance, fear, and hatred still exist then as they do today. So we must be on our guard and not allow racial injustice to thrive again.
The Emancipation Proclamation issued on January 1st, 1863, President Lincoln announced that black men would finally be accepted into the U.S. Army and Navy. Of the estimated 2 million people who fought on the Union side, some 180,000 black soldiers and sailors would enlist to the fight for freedom. The 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment was one of the most celebrated regiments of black soldiers that fought for the Civil War, simply known as the 54th. These men would be the first African American regiment able to serve the Union and its cause. Intentionally, Negro troops were co-signed to labor duties only often mocked by neighboring Union officers. It was under the direction of leadership of Colonel Robert Gouldshaw, a 23-year-old white Boston native and abolitionist, that these men would rise from the depths of discrimination and earn the right to fight for the freedom, honor, dignity, and perseverance of the Union. The solidification of brotherhood in arms came to the light of day that these men of the 54th received their first paycheck. Once promised, they would receive a regular soldier wage of $13. They were given $10 due to the fact they were a Negro regiment. In an unprecedented act of courage and common sense, Colonel Shaw united them by declaring, if they will not receive equal pay, then none of us will. He then tore up his own check in front of him and forever endearing himself to his troops. The 54th became nationally recognized after the heroic but ill-fated assault on Fort Wagner, South Carolina, leading the direct but necessary assault under heavy fire. The 54th suffered numerous casualties before forced to withdraw. The courage, valor, and sacrifice of the 54th helped dispel any doubts within the Union Army about the fighting ability of black soldiers and earned the regiment undying battlefield glory. Edward L. Pierce, an eyewitness reporter of the New York Tribune, stated the 54th fought well and nobly. They moved up as gallantly as any troops could, and with their enthusiasm, they deserve a better fate. Today we are immortalizing the award-winning film masterpiece Glory. Perhaps one member at the 54th deserves special recognition. A native of New Bedford, Massachusetts, Sergeant William Carney emphasizes the endurance of the human spirit, as well added death before dishonor. Please welcome Sergeant Carney.
Thank you, Jeremiah. I was proud to serve under Colonel Shaw as a member of the 54th and take part in our historic charge on Fort Wagner. After suffering devastating casualties to our regiment and the loss of our colonel himself, I began to fear that we would be forced to withdraw. Suddenly, I witnessed a sight that struck terror within my heart and drew tears of despair. Knowing that Old Glory herself must never fall, it was then that I saw a flag bearer struck down by a Confederate bullet. It is the sole honor of the flag bearer to lead a regiment into action as a rallying symbol of one's allegiance to his country. I decided at that moment that some causes are greater than self-interest, and I was immediately galvanized into action. I ran into our stricken flag bearer and took up the colors myself and determined to bring them safely back to our camp at any cost. Crawling through sand, wading chest deep in swampy water, I was struck by enemy fire 5 times, including my legs, both arms, chest, and head, but continued onwards despite severe pain and heavy bleeding. When I had finally entered my camp, I was received with a thunderous ovation from my fellow soldiers who had long presumed both myself and our flag long gone. Before I finally collapsed to the ground from total exhaustion and blood loss, I was proudly stated, "Boys, I only did my duty." The flag never touched the ground. It was for these actions that I became the first African American to be awarded the Distinguished Medal of Honor, our nation's highest award for courage and bravery in action. For reasons later labeled as an oversight, I received my medal in 1900, 37 years after I earned it. But what is most important to me is that I am a part of a proud legacy that, as the great emancipator himself acknowledged, helped to turn the tide of water and preserve the union for which we so valiantly fought to uphold.
Abraham Lincoln was born into poverty in the state of Kentucky in 1809. He was mostly self-educated, failed as a businessman, became a lawyer, and entered politics. In 1860, at the age of 52, he became President of the United States. Mr. President, I'll let you finish the story yourself.
Years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice.
I did become president in 1860. It was a difficult time to lead because many states in our young country wanted the right to keep slaves, while other states thought slavery should once and forever be abolished. I agreed with the abolitionists and tried to prevent new states from adopting slavery. I was naturally anti-slavery. If slavery was not wrong, nothing was wrong. I cannot remember when I did not think so. Whenever I heard anyone arguing for slavery, I felt a strong impulse to see it tried on him. Personally, slave states, those mainly in the South, rebelled and left the Union and formed their own government. The Confederate States of America, this led to the Great Civil War, which lasted 5 years and nearly destroyed the Union. I legally freed all slaves in the Confederate States that did not rejoin the Union when I wrote the Emancipation Proclamation. I later gave a now famous speech, the Gettysburg Address, at the site of the battle that led to the South's defeat. In 1865, I was shot and killed while watching a play, Our American Cousin. My assassin was John Wilkes Booth, a Southerner who still believed slavery should be legally accepted. However horrible the war itself it was, and how many heroes laid so costly a sacrifice upon the altar of freedom, it was the only solution that will allow this nation under God to have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth.
Jackie Robinson was a great athlete and a human being. He played 4 sports in college, was a veteran of World War II, and was the star of the Negroes League's Kansas City Monarchs. He was also known as the man who changed the color of sports. Please welcome Mr. Jackie Robinson.
Thank you, Chelsea. When I was playing for the Kansas City Monarchs, professional baseball and all other sports were strictly segregated. The American and National Leagues were all white, forcing black players to play in the Negro Leagues. Following World War II in 1947, the Brooklyn Dodgers president and manager, Branch Rickey, wanted to integrate baseball. He needed a good athlete who was willing to suffer insults, threats, and segregation. I couldn't sleep with the rest of the team in white hotels or eat with them in white restaurants and not fight back. I accepted the challenge. We won the national pennant that year, and I was named Rookie of the Year. I had a successful career over the next 10 years, led the National League in stolen bases, and won the 1947 batting title. All of that was nice enough, I guess. But what really mattered was because of my efforts. Racial walls collapsed. Teams were integrated, and sports in America have never been the same.
Emmett Till was born in Chicago, Illinois in 1941. At the age of 14, he traveled to Mississippi during summer vacation, to visit some of his cousins who lived there. What he did or did not do is still unknown to this day. However, what would happen to him would shock the nation and ignite the fuse that would lead the civil rights movement.
Thank you, Elisiana. Growing up in the North, I never fully realized what the Jim Crow laws meant to the people in my race. When visiting my cousins down south, they told me stories I found hard to believe concerning the way they were treated by the town's white citizens. On the evening of August 24, 1955, I and several of my friends and cousins went to a store downtown. A 21-year-old white woman was working at the register. To this day, some people say I whistled at her. Others say I merely winked. But what I can say for sure is, I, Emmett Till, was later taken from my uncle's house by the woman's husband and his half-brother and driven away towards the Tallahatchie River. I was forced to carry a 70-pound gin fan on my back while walking towards the river. I was pistol whipped, beaten, and shot behind the ear. My body was thrown into the river with the fan still attached to drown me. I was found 3 days later, so beaten, I could only be identified by the ring on my finger. My mother decided to have an open casket at my funeral to show the world what racism did to her son. My murderers were arrested and tried in court and were found not guilty by an all-white jury. They later bragged about killing me to a reporter for Look magazine.
Rosa Parks was born in 1913, more than 45 years after Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, but that didn't mean she was legally free to equally enjoy her rights as an American citizen. She lived in Montgomery, Alabama, where Jim Crow laws still ruled. These laws meant that blacks could not equally enjoy all the rights that white people took for granted One of these was the right to sit on a bus wherever there was a seat available and to remain there until you reach your destination. But I think she can finish her story better than I can, Miss Parks.
When do I go on?
Thank you. As Leandra said in 1955, Jim Crow was the law, and the law said that if the bus was crowded and a white person needed a seat, a Negro had to give up his or her seat to the white person. Well, I had worked that day and my feet were tired. I was also tired of Jim Crow laws, so when I was asked to stand up, I did, by politely saying no and remaining in my seat. The police were called. I was arrested and taken to jail. My arrest led to boycott of the white-owned city bus company for over a year. All the blacks in Montgomery agreed not to ride the buses. The company lost so much money. They agreed to change the law, and black passengers were finally treated the same as white passengers. The boycott also led to sit-in, freedom rides, voter registration drives, and the Voting Right Act of 1965. Involved in all of these activities was a young minister named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but you'll hear from him later.
Ruby Neal Bridges was born September 8, 1954, in Taylortown, Mississippi, and is known as the first black child to attend an all-white elementary school in the segregated South. She was only 6 years old when she was first escorted by federal marshals to attend William Frentz Elementary School in New Orleans, Louisiana. Her unprecedented act of courage stands as an inspiration to all children the world over who face personal doubting challenges in their quest to be offered quality in education.
Thank you, Beyonce. In the spring of 1960, I was one of the 6 black children in New Orleans to pass the test that determined whether or not black children would go to the all-white school. I went to the school by myself while the other 5 children went somewhere else. I was the only one assigned to William Frantz Elementary School. My father was initially reluctant, but my mother felt strongly that the move was needed, not only to give me a better education, but to take this step forward for all African American children. My mother finally convinced Daddy to let me go to the school. People always say that you never forget your first day of school. In my case, that was certainly true. I asked Mama who the 4 men with the yellow armbands were who were waiting for me outside my house. She told me they were there simply to drive me to school. Only later did I realize that they were federal marshals assigned by President Eisenhower to escort me and protect me from all the people who felt I didn't belong there. Driving up, I could see the crowd of people standing outside of the school. They were throwing things and shouting bad names at me. As soon as I entered the school, white parents pulled their own children out of it. All the teachers refused to teach me there while I was a student. Only one person agreed to teach me. Her name was Mrs. Henry, a white woman from Massachusetts. I liked my new teacher right away. For over a year, Mrs. Henry taught me alone as if she were teaching the whole class. Every morning, as I walked towards the school, one lady would threaten to poison me. Because of this, the U.S. Marshals only allowed me to eat food that I brought from home. Another lady at the school put a black baby doll in a wooden coffin and protested with it outside of the school. That scared me more than all the nasty things people screamed at me. At Mama's suggestion, I began to pray on the way to school every morning. It made me feel better, and I felt like it protected me from the people who yelled at me on my daily walks. I even said a prayer for them too. One of the men with the yellow armband said I showed a lot of courage. He noticed that I never cried and didn't whimper. He said, just marched along like a little soldier. They were all very proud of me. After that, Daddy ended up losing his job and we weren't allowed to shop at the grocery store anymore. My act of courage was forever immortalized in Norman Rockwell's famous painting, The Problem We All Live With. In 1999, I started the Ruby Bridges Foundation to promote the values of tolerance, respect, and appreciation of all differences. The message I hope I have taught all of you today is that racism is a grown-up disease that we must all stop using our children to spread it.
Born Malcolm Little in Omaha, Nebraska, and growing up in Langston, Michigan, Malcolm X learned early on how unfair bigotry and prejudice in 1935 America could be. The unequal treatment he saw as a young man affected him deeply. As a teenager, he rebelled against white society and began a journey of crime that led to his imprisonment at the age of 21. I thank you. Let's take it from here.
Jonathan is correct. I was a rebel against white society and was very angry. For you see, the white supremacist organization, the KKK, had burned my house down and my father was murdered by people who were similar in mind. I proudly proclaimed that I was the angriest Negro in America. My hatred for white society and rebellious ways did land me in prison. But while I was still there, I studied the philosophy and teachings of the Nation of Islam and became a black Muslim. I also got rid of my slave name, Little, and called myself Malcolm X. I figured if I would never knew my true African name, I wouldn't have one at all. I became a minister and preached black pride and black nationalism. I was still angry and did not believe in the nonviolent approach of Dr. Martin Luther King and did not want to live side by side with white society. But as I matured and continued to study Islam, I gradually began to accept the coexistence of the races, and this led me to reconcile with white society. But while preaching about black pride and the races coming together, I was gunned down and assassinated in 1965. However, this was not before I wrote the biography of Malcolm X, a book that led a generation of admirers of all color to look me as a hero. It helps show that hatred is destructive to all and that peaceful reconciliation benefits to all. Abide by it.
Our final speaker of the evening is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was a Baptist minister who believed in nonviolent protests against intolerance. His leadership in the national civil rights movement was unappalled. It helped to ignite and awaken the compassion of millions of people of all races. The many movements he led resulted in landmark legal decisions. The decisions, to a larger degree, ended discrimination in America. While he will tell you more of his story shortly, I believe he would agree that much has been accomplished, much remains to be done. A dream is something that cannot die as long as one person believes in it. It is up to you, it is up to us to make his dream, our dream, come true. Now please welcome Dr. King.
What was asked?
Thank you very kindly. As a Negro born in the South in 1935, I was always aware of the civil rights movement, or lack of them, that some people of this nation were afforded. As a young Baptist minister, I always tried to see that everyone's rights were equally shared due to my presence and involvement in the struggle. I found myself in a leadership role in the national civil rights movement at the tender age of 26. I organized and led the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama that Rosa Parks so bravely began. Soon after that, I helped found the SCLC, or Southern Christian Leadership Conference. This organization promoted nonviolent protests against segregation and discrimination throughout America. On August 28, 1963, I led the march on Washington, D.C., which drew a crowd of nearly 300,000 people. On that day, I spoke of a dream I had for America. Perhaps you heard it. This march helped lead to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Somewhere in between all of this, I was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize on April 3rd, 1968. I gave a speech in Memphis, Tennessee, warning that difficult days lay ahead. I said I had looked over the mountaintop and seen the promised land, and that I might not get there with you. This feeling was correct. The very next day, April 4th, 1968, I was gunned down by an assassin's bullet, but my dreams still live on.
My fellow Americans, I stand here today grateful for the diversity of my heritage, aware that my parents' dreams live on in my two precious daughters. I stand here knowing that my story is a part of the larger American story, that I owe a debt to all of those who came before me, and that in no other country on earth is my story even possible. Tonight I stand here before you as the 44th President of the United States of America. It is not a black America, nor a white America, nor Latino, nor Asian. It is the United States of America. Hope is the thing inside of us that insists, despite all the evidence to the country, that something better awaits us if we have the courage to reach for it and to work for it and to fight for it. Hope is the belief that destiny will not be written for us, but by us, by the men and women who are not content to settle for the world as it is, who have the courage to remake the world as it should be. It was the hope of slaves sitting around a fire singing freedom songs, the hope of immigrants setting out for distant shores, the hope of a skinny kid with a funny name who believes that America has a place for him too. Hope in the face of difficulty, hope in the face of uncertainty. In the end, that is God's greatest gift to us, a belief in things not seen, that there are better days ahead. We are a nation of Christians and Muslims, Jews and Hindus and non-believers. We are shaped by every language and culture, drawn from every end of this earth. And because we have tasted the bitter swill of civil war and segregation, we have emerged from that dark chapter stronger and more united. So let us mark this day with remembrance of who we are and how far we have traveled. The time has come to carry forward the precious gift, the noble idea passed on from generation to generation, the God-given promise that all are created equal, all are free, and all deserve a chance to pursue their full measure of happiness. May God bless all of you, and may God bless the United States of America. Before I leave you today, I want to remind you that dream which lives on in the hearts and minds of each and every single one of you sitting here today, in spite of the difficulties of today and tomorrow.
Put it up here. We still have a dream.
It was a dream deeply rooted in an American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and deliver the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equally. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream that one day little black boys and girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. And when this happens, when we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, thank God Almighty we are free at last.
Thank you so much for attending Roosevelt Middle School's Black History Month tribute and fundraiser. We would like to thank our students, faculty, administration, our principal, Mr. Dan Basalt, family, friends, and distinguished guests for their generous support today. We dedicate this evening's tribute in memory of those who gave some and some who gave all in the cause of freedom. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.
We made it. Oh my goodness. Before we say goodbye, a few things. First of all, to every one of you for coming out here tonight. This was postponed again and again and again and again through every combination possible that a televised Lifetime movie could never fulfill. And I know it's the end of March, but we didn't let the fates allow us to stop. We finally did it, and I'm so, so proud of these kids for finally presenting this to you guys tonight. So thank you again for coming, and thank you guys. Now, come on out. Get in a straight line, guys, okay? Let's get another huge round of applause for our cast. 200 years of Black history represented by Roosevelt Middle School. A few notes of thanks that have to go out. A huge thank you for backstage help as well from Miss Manansky, Miss Cusick, Miss Sky, Miss Marks, Miss Pino, Mr. Connor, our admin, Officer DeMello, Miss DeMello for showing up, Greg McEwen for doing the sound. Two of my all-time heroes, which I have to be careful I don't get emotional, are sitting right in that front row right there. Please give it up for New Bedford legends, Armin Marchand and Mr. George Charbonneau. I am so honored that you came to see this. I was their student at the high school. They changed my life with a love of theater. And while we're quite not the caliber of you guys, we try our very best. I am so honored that you came here. Thank you beyond belief. To the Martin Luther King Committee of New Bedford, with Mrs. Marcy Pina Christian, wherever you are, I cannot thank you enough for being here. There she is, right there. Thank you. NGO, yes. Thank you guys. To Anne-Marie Lopes and the Reverend Cable Access for taking pictures and filming this entire thing. Once again, cannot thank you enough. And last but not least, the carpe to my diem. Give it up for Miss Rosa. And last but not least, a 34-year veteran. My father's here with us in spirit, and my mother will still never say never to continue helping us. Give it up for my mom, Mrs. Noel, Marjorie Noel. Thank you very much.